Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi, and Mississippi, for that matter, a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, we've got a great show today, and I want to, as a sort of a kind of a predicate to the conversation that we're going to have, I want to give you a little bit of background about some stuff that I was involved with early in my career. Before I became president and publisher of the Sun Herald, I was involved in a lot of efforts to lead certain parts of the company, and I spent actually an extended period of time in the operations side of our company. And when you're the operations director for a manufacturing facility, which a newspaper plant is, you have to be really very focused on OSHA rules and EPA regulations and local environmental regulations, et cetera. And we were part of Knight Ridder Company, and Knight Ridder was incredibly environmentally conscious. So it was really important to them. In fact, they did annual audits around this. It was very important to them to know that all of the newspapers that were part of their group were paying close attention to the environmental requirements that we had. And if you don't measure it, as someone once said, what gets measured gets done. If you don't pay attention to it, then it'd be easy for your other duties to overshadow whatever those important duties are, and you kind of move on and do it. So that's one of the reasons the environmental audits were done every year. Well, because it was important to Knight Ridder, I got involved in a number of organizations. I was involved in the Mississippi Wildlife Federation as a volunteer for many years. Actually became president of the Wildlife Federation early in my career. I was appointed as a member of what is called the Gulf of Mexico program. I was on the advisory committee. It's an EPA program that's really focused on the Gulf of Mexico. It involves states that drain into the Gulf of Mexico, and obviously Mexico. You can imagine it's important to have Mexico as part of the conversation. I went to meetings in Mexico along the way. I learned a lot about the Mississippi River. Think of the Mississippi River. It's a watershed that involves 32 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces. So everything that happens in those states ultimately drain down the Mississippi River, about 40% of the land mass of the continental United States. I learned a lot about the Gulf of Mexico, too, that it's not like the Atlantic Ocean where you're having this constant flow. Someone described it to me. I shouldn't say it this way, but they did at one time. It's like a commode. It's just constantly going around in circles, but it doesn't actually flush. You have a little bit of seepage that might occur along the way, but the reality is what comes in down the Mississippi River goes into the Gulf of Mexico. Thank God it's a pretty resilient body of water, but we better pay a lot more attention to what happens along the watershed of the Mississippi River. We learned that actually after the Bonnet Carré Spillway was open multiple times and we had the algae bloom. It wasn't necessarily just the fresh water that was our problem. It was the over-nutrification from fertilizers and pesticides and all these it polluted water basically. And it created a major problem for us. So we had to pay attention to it. And truthfully, if you go back and look at history, I'm amazed myself that from the days I was involved in the Gulf of Mexico program back in the early 90s, all the way through today, America is still not investing in the Mississippi River watershed, the Mississippi River in particular, the way it should after all this time. In a way, it's actually kind of frustrating. But what I want to do, I've invited 2 people to join me today. Matt Rota, who's the Senior Policy Director for Healthy Gulf, and Kelly McGinnis, who works as the Executive Director for the National Mississippi River Network. And first, let me welcome both to the show. How you guys doing?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah. It's good to see you. So Kelly, when you hear me talk about my past and being a little frustrated, we haven't invested the kind of money into this from a federal government point of view. It rings true with you and your organization, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does.
What is the Mississippi River Network?
The Mississippi River Network is a coalition of over 60 organizations in all 10 main stem states the river flows through, as well as national organizations. And together we focus on policy work as well as outreach. And we're working towards a healthy Mississippi River for all. So for the people, for the land, for the water, and the wildlife.
That's good. I'm glad you're at the table, because the reality is it's going to take a coalition to solve this. Governmental and non-governmental, and lots of volunteers and lots of people focused. So coming over to you, Matt, tell me about your organization, Healthy Gulf.
Sure. Yeah, I work for Healthy Gulf. We are an environmental advocacy organization based in New Orleans, and our mission is, our purpose is to collaborate and serve our communities who love the Gulf of Mexico by providing research, communications, and coalition building tools that they need to reverse the long pattern of overexploitation of the Gulf's natural resources. And obviously, the Mississippi River plays a very large role in the health of the Gulf of Mexico and the communities that depend upon it. And I'm based in New Orleans, but we have staff in Mississippi, Florida, and Texas as well.
Well, interesting. Hey, listen, I always like to get to know people a little bit more about who they are, but I noticed for the radio audience, you obviously can't see this, but Facebook and YouTube can. I see your guitars behind you. Are you a music aficionado?
Yeah, I am. Actually, my main instrument is the banjo. I play a lot of bluegrass and old time music. My banjos just aren't in the picture. That's my my grandpa's guitar that he used to play. So I don't play it very much, but I like to have it up there to remind me.
Well, I grew up on music. I bang on the piano. My mother was a piano teacher, but I played drums my whole life. Drums kind of my thing. I love all kinds of music. I mean, when I'm thinking hard, I'll have Vivaldi or Mozart or Beethoven. But boy, do I love bluegrass. I love to go to the Smoky Mountains and Blue Ridge Parkway and just immerse myself in the culture there. It's so amazing. And is that where you got it from?
I picked it up when I was in grad school at the University of South Carolina is where I picked up the banjo. Yeah.
Well, Matt, how did you end up getting into this kind of work?
Well, I've lived on the Mississippi River almost my entire life. I grew up in southern Illinois, up on the bluffs of the Mississippi River, and one of my formative moments that I had in my life was when I was in high school. Was the Mississippi River flood of 93, and that flooded my family's land, destroyed a family farm, and I was down there sandbagging in Valby, Illinois, trying to shore up some of the agricultural levees that were down there, and that really just kind of put something in my brain about the Mississippi. And I've always had a connection to the and subsequently a respect for the Mississippi River, and you start hearing the stories of people saying, how this never happened before. This never we flooded. The previous time we had the major flood was in 27, and so that's just always been kind of a part of my life, and also just being in the environment and making sure and learning about the connection of people to the environment. I think that's one thing that's always fascinated me, is that the people and the environment aren't separate, and they depend on each other, and we need to be part of the environment. And I think we're learning kind of the consequences of being more of having a dominion perspective of just trying to control nature, and realizing that we can't control it. We can work with it, and I've been subsequently got my degree at Tulane University in New Orleans. Like I said, was out in South Carolina to get my master's degree, and I've been back and doing this specific work for 16, 17 years now.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. Kelly, I noticed you have a very calm dog sitting behind you. Where are you sitting now?
I'm in the Chicago area. That's my best friend Jasper, who will just not leave my side. So he is a Mississippi River lover as well.
Yeah. Hey Kelly, we had a guy in his 80s from Gulfport that went all the way to the headwaters of the Mississippi River, and did a canoe all the way down to the mouth of the Mississippi River. The oldest man to ever do that ever. And what was interesting about his journey, I spent some time in Minnesota during my career doing some in the St. Paul area, and with the outdoor reporter for the St. Paul's Pioneer Press, went to fish and sort of enjoy the outdoors there. The headwaters of the Mississippi River are some of the most beautiful parts of the country. And as you work your way down, it gets bigger and more violent and more needed to be tamed. At least they think they can tame it. The Corps thinks they can tame it. But it is an incredible body of water, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And I think, Ricky, you hit on something, that the river is so different. So depending where you live, you see a very different Mississippi River if you're fortunate to live near the river. But from the headwaters to the Gulf, it changes dramatically, and people's relationship changes dramatically. So I think one of our roles, as well as people focused on the Mississippi and wanting to connect people to why the Mississippi is important, is understanding that the river is different depending where you are. Like, we're in the coastal Mississippi, state of Mississippi, I'm sorry, is, that's a much wider, like you said, I don't want to use the word violent, but just stronger river, and that you just have to understand that there may be more fear around how to engage with that river.
So let's do this. When we come back on the other side, we're going to talk more about why this is an important conversation for coastal Mississippians, and for Mississippi for that matter. We have Matt Rota, who is the Senior Policy Director from Healthy Gulf, and Kelly McGinnis, who's with the National Mississippi River Network. He's the Executive Director there. We'll continue the conversation on the other side. See you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We have Matt Rota, who's with Healthy Gulf, and Kelly McGinnis, who's with the National Mississippi River Network. And when we went to break, Kelly was letting us know where she was, and we're talking about the incredible diversity of the Mississippi River. It is it's quite diverse. I would actually say that it's probably one of the most taken for granted watersheds in the world, probably, because of its impact. I mean, in every respect, environmentally, culturally, agriculturally, economically. Good Lord, the impact on the United States is truly remarkable. Kelly, how did you get into this business?
So my background, I grew up in Illinois, but not on the river, closer to the Chicago area, but had a deep connection with nature just from how I was brought up, and water. And I first started off my career as a fisheries biologist in the Pacific Northwest, working on rivers, as well as coastal Washington, and in particular focused on fish, which I loved. But I felt like I wanted to have a larger impact, that maybe focusing on one species of fish, while very important, wasn't maybe the right path for me. And I was also interested in connecting with people a bit more than you get to when you're a research scientist. And then I also moved back to the Chicago area and was just fortunate to find the Mississippi River Network, and an opportunity to get back into water work. So it allowed me to have my science background, as well as my desire for communications and connecting people to nature and to science. I was very fortunate to find this role, and I've been with the Mississippi River Network for about 8 years now, and have really seen a lot of enthusiasm grow for the Mississippi River, which I just love. And I know we need more and more people connected to the river to get to where we want to be.
Yeah, I see that. Hey, by the way, the Pacific Northwest, that is some beautiful part of this country, isn't it?
Oh, it is one of the if anyone ever has the chance to go to the temperate rainforest, the Olympic National Park, I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth I've ever been.
Yeah. Woo, what a great part of the country. Hey, so Matt, coming back over to you, are we making progress?
Yes, we are making progress. We back several decades ago, we were dumping raw sewage into the river and not regulating anything. So yes, the Mississippi River is a lot cleaner than it was, but that doesn't mean that it is clean, and that we still have a lot of pollution that flows down the Mississippi River, especially fertilizer pollution that comes from runoff from agricultural fields that cause things like the algae bloom that we saw in the Bonnie Carey that impacted coastal Mississippi a couple of years ago, and that causes the dead zone down in the Gulf of Mexico every year. And we aren't seeing it get smaller. So I would say that it's a story where we're kind of in the second act right now with the Mississippi River, that we've made some progress, but now is the time to really make sure that not only is it clean, but also that we're giving the river room to do what rivers are supposed to do, and protecting the floodplains, restoring the communities, and restoring the relationship between the floodplains, communities, and the river.
You know what would be interesting? This is a whole nother conversation, so I'm not even asking this as a question. It's just an observation. We have I lease 3 farms in the Mississippi Delta and have great relationships with farmers up there. And they are obviously hugely challenged right now because of the Russian situation, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we play the markets from what we're going to plant? And we're seeing a lot more of them moving like the soybeans, for example, where they don't have to fertilize as much as, say, if they did corn or cotton. It would be interesting to see if there's an accumulative effect of less fertilization on the river, or if that's something you can even measure. Is that just a one-time blip? Will the dead zone be less off the coast of Louisiana this year than it was in the past year? I don't know. It'd be interesting. I don't even know if anybody's weighing into that at all. When you think about it, Kelly, are we making progress from your point of view?
I think Matt hit the nail on the head. There has been progress. The Clean Water Act turns 50 years old this year, and while the true aspiration of that act has not been seen, which is all rivers are swimmable, fishable, drinkable, it has had an impact. We don't dump raw sewage into the water anymore. We have more and more organizations and communities wanting to figure out how to live better with the river as well. So, in my work, I'm privy to communities that are trying to redevelop their floodplain. So when flooding happens, they're not ruining infrastructure, but hey, this park is built to flood, but then people can enjoy it in other times, for example. So there has been progress, but we don't have a coordinated approach to fighting the problems on the Mississippi River. And I think when you look at a system as big as the river, and as you said, Ricky, it's draining about 40% of the continental United States, you just need to have a coordinated approach looking at that whole system and how we can help improve it from that perspective. So I agree with Matt that we are in the second act. We're building up that like a concert, the drumbeat is getting louder for us to really have the opportunity to actually make true progress instead of these little fits and starts.
Well, if you go back in history, and we spent a lot of time when I was in the Gulf of Mexico program studying the Chesapeake Bay National Estuary Program and the successes that have been gained at Chesapeake Bay. People down here might think about the Everglades and what's happened in the Everglades over a number of years. You think about the Great Lakes, really a good success story in terms of where we were back in the height of the manufacturing, sector around the Great Lakes, and what has happened since then. I mean, you go to Chicago today, and the water's beautiful, and I know that there's still challenges, but it is a far cry from what it was. You think I studied a lot about Chesapeake Bay because I wanted to understand how they made so much progress and what kind of focus that needs to be. And it is quite amazing that there hasn't been a federally funded, dedicated funding source for restoration for the Mississippi River. And the thing that all these other areas, including Puget Sound, have in common is this dedicated federal restoration program. Why haven't we been able to achieve that goal? I know that there's efforts underway now, but looking back, why have we failed to be able to create the same kind of restoration program for the Mississippi River?
I think that one of the challenges the Mississippi River faces is that the geography is larger than even the Great Lakes area. So the amount of need of 10 states, as well as to be in agreement, and the federal government, I think that just has offered some larger challenges why we haven't gotten there yet. But as you mentioned, we currently do have an opportunity to get a geographic program for the Mississippi River, and the ability to have a non-regulatory voluntary program that basically just adds funding. Think of it as topping off existing government programs that, like, an example would be topping off conservation programs in the Farm Bill that farmers love and want to participate in, and often there isn't enough money to go around, so they're not able to. And that could have a huge impact. And there's no reason for people to not want to have this coordinated approach that just makes the river healthier, makes communities healthier, and makes people more prepared for events like flooding.
Yeah. Mississippi passed this year an outdoor stewardship trust fund that's designed to create matching funds so that we can draw down. The lion's share of the money happens to be in the Farm Bill. But the Farm Bill, what a revolutionary piece of legislation, and what it's done for the environment and creating habitat. And it's truly one of the big success stories for America, isn't it, Matt?
Oh, very much so. And that's the thing, is that is another one of these differences, is that we're just so heavily, that we're a lot more rural here than a lot of these other programs are. And so that brings in a lot of the land stewardship opportunities of farmers and things like that. And it's just, so a lot of it is that we just aren't, funding a lot of the things that we could be funding, to just make sure, because sometimes you need the funds to put in that grass waterway for your farm, or to put up fencing to keep cattle out of fields, or to put on cover crops. And we need to support our farmers and other folks to make sure that they have the ability to do that. And sometimes it costs a little bit more money, or it costs more money up front, but then they can reap the benefits year after year that they're keeping their topsoil. So I think it's, we're currently trying to push through a program in the House of Representatives right now called the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative, which would basically make this program possible, put money towards this. Representative McCollum from Minnesota has put it forward, and we have Representative Benny Thompson from Mississippi. We have Representative Carter from Louisiana, all pushing for this program.
Well, I'm excited to hear that. And what we'll do is consider this just a beginning of a conversation, because we're out of time. But we did what we needed to do today, just bring it to people's psyche, and hopefully we can get this Restoration and Resilience Initiative moving forward for the Mississippi River. I'm confident we can. But we'll check in with you guys and see how we're progressing. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ricky.
Yeah, thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Kelly and Matt. We really appreciate you guys. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation.